My name is Dave Ford, and I'm going to provide a brief introduction to the Google Web Toolkit. First, we'll talk about what GWT is and how it works. Then I'll go over the basic steps for creating a simple GWT application. Then we'll actually build an application together so that you can see what the code looks like. What is GWT? GWT is a tool for creating web user interfaces using Java, but it's probably different from tools you've used in the past. So let's start by reviewing how user interfaces are generally created for the web. Web user interfaces are mostly created using HTML. If you've got a little bit more courage, you can create user interfaces using HTML plus a little bit of JavaScript along with DOM, the Document Object Model. That's an API for modifying or manipulating an HTML page programmatically. And if you've got a lot of time on your hands, you can actually use all JavaScript and DOM to create the user interface and very little HTML. Now, most people don't do that, but it turns out this particular type of architecture is fundamentally how GWT works. So let me show you an example. Here's a web page that has two lines, which are called HR, horizontal rule, in HTML, and two input boxes. Actually, 3 lines. Here's the HTML code for this page. If you look at the HTML, what you see is there's actually no user interface stuff. There's only a call to a piece of JavaScript in a file called dave.js. So what that tells us is wherever that user interface with 3 lines and 2 input boxes is being created, it's not here in the HTML file, it's actually in the JS file, the dave.js file. So let's take a look at that. If you look at that sucker, the first thing we do here is we're getting a handle on the HTML page as a whole. Then we're accessing the body of the HTML page, that's the body tag. And then from there, we're simply appending 5 elements. A line, an input box, a line, an input box, and a line. And that's what it looks like. So, if you really want to not use HTML and use JavaScript instead, you can do so to build your entire user interface. Now, most people don't do it this way, but it turns out that this conceptually is how GWT works. The only difference is you don't work directly with the JavaScript. Thus, on to our next slide. So, why not work directly with JavaScript? Well, it turns out there's a few problems. First, let me pull up the code from our previous slide. Okay, the first problem is JavaScript might not be your preferred language. A lot of people prefer a strongly typed language like Java. You get better IDE support from tools such as IntelliJ or NetBeans or Eclipse. Also, with strongly typed languages, you're more likely to find your errors sooner rather than later. As a side note, let me just point out right now the industry is all over the place on this particular issue. Some of the new really popular languages out now include Ruby and Python, and a lot of people are flocking to those. And it's actually because they're not strongly typed, they're dynamic languages. But Google decided that Java was a more productive tool to code directly in than JavaScript. Second thing is that the API, DOM, is really verbose. So if you're going to build a user interface using the DOM API, it's going to take a long time. So with the Google Web Toolkit, as you're going to see in the upcoming slides, there's a few things. One, JavaScript is replaced by Java. 2, instead of the DOM API, you're going to use an API that looks very similar to the AWT or Swing APIs. Now, the concept is still the same. You're still going to create a very minimal HTML page, as shown here, and the entire page is going to be designed programmatically using Java code. The only difference is the Java code is going to get translated into the JavaScript code. In fact, that's the main thing that Google Web Toolkit does. You create Java code that conceptually isn't too different from what you're seeing here in the JavaScript, and then that Java code is translated or compiled into the actual JavaScript code. So summarizing what we have so far, GWT is a tool for creating web user interfaces using Java. You build the user interface using Java code along with the GWT API, which in theory is a little bit easier to program in than what's actually generated under the covers, and that is the JavaScript plus the DOM. So you code using Java, and GWT generates the JavaScript. Thus, GWT is essentially a Java GWT to JavaScript DOM translator. Now, technically speaking, you might not even need to know how all this works under the covers, but that's where I thought I would start because I feel it's helpful to understand where GWT fits into the bigger picture of web toolkits. Also, a lot of things don't always work right the first time, and understanding what's going on behind the scenes, to me, is usually helpful. But let's get on to the actual steps, the actual step-by-step process to create a GWT application. And once you actually see the code, it'll make a lot more sense to you.